Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Spencer. Today I'm joined by Isabella Lubin, who is one of the program managers. I personally think the best of the program managers involved in the Administrative Council for Microsoft Teams. And today we're going to talk about administration of Microsoft Teams in the government community cloud environment. Isabella, please take it away.
Great, thank you. So excited to be here today. We had a little bit of a malfunction with the speaker, so I'm going to fly through the first couple of slides so we can get to the meat of the presentation. And what we're talking about today is how to manage Microsoft Teams effectively in GCC. So we'll talk about the value of Microsoft Teams. It's a hub for teamwork. It's the fastest growing business app in Microsoft history. And then we'll talk about the different phases of management that organizations think about as they onboard and leverage the product. So we'll work through how to ensure that you're ready to onboard as an organization, the different tools that you have for onboarding, the tools that you have at your disposal for ongoing management. These are the day-to-day tasks that your IT department perform, and then touch briefly on how you can measure impact, the success of the product. So we announced at Ignite, Microsoft Teams is the fastest growing business app in Microsoft history. It is the hub for teamwork in Office 365. It brings together all of these rich controls for communication that you're used to for Skype, from Skype for Business, around chats and meeting and calling. But it brings that together in a single client so that you can not just have this traditional mode of communication, but actually have that mode of communication working around the content that you're creating with others. So you can collaborate with the integrated Office 365 apps like Excel and Word and PowerPoint. It also brings in the capability of customizing and extending with a set of other apps. And in GovCloud, this is largely the O365 apps, and then working on bringing in other apps as well. But you can collaborate with the tools that you use throughout your organization for other scenarios around collaboration, all again within this single client where you're also performing all of your regular calls and meetings and chats. And then you can work with confidence. So it's not just a client. It brings together all of the rich security and compliance and governance controls that you're used to from Microsoft. And so all of these controls that we have around retention and archiving and setting policies around guest access, all of those rich controls you're used to from other parts of the M365 workloads are supported within Teams. So the biggest question is, well, okay, so we've talked a lot about the value of Teams, but how do you actually onboard? How do you actually think about setting up all of these governance controls that you might need? The first thing you consider is really, okay, how do you make sure that you are ready to onboard to the product? For supporting Microsoft Teams, we have a set of admin roles that you can leverage that allow you to delegate out the parts of the management experience that different people within your IT departments will perform. So this is really about making sure that the people who are going to be supporting the product are actually ready to use the product itself. We have a set of documentation for how they can make sure that they are at successwithteams.com, for how they can make sure that they understand how the product will work and have experience using it themselves. And then you can assign the right admin roles. So these 4 roles are the Team Service Administrator, which you can think of roughly as the equivalent of global admin within Microsoft Teams. So this is the role that you assign to someone who needs to perform all of the management tools related tasks related to administration of Teams itself. The Teams Communications Administrator is focused really on meetings and calling and telephony. So this is the person in your organization who may perform deep network analysis or handle all of the telephony scenarios. And then there are 2 support roles, the support engineer and the support specialist, who have access to call analytics to do troubleshooting for your organization when users may have a poor call. And then these are the roles that are specific just for Teams, but within your organization and within your IT department, you will have other admin personas, the security reader, right? The reports reader, compliance officers. And so all of these roles are also assignable through the AAD infrastructure. So you can make sure that the people in your organization who need to support Teams and the rest of the workloads within M365 have the right permissions that they need to be able to do that. One of the great values of Microsoft Teams is that it's not siloed to a single platform within within Office 365. It runs on a wide set of services so that we can deliver this rich experience. So it uses all of the Office 365 services and apps to be able to integrate all of these apps into the client. A set of proprietary services that we run just for managing teams, Skype infrastructure for delivering great communication experiences, and then obviously it runs on top of Azure for a number of scenarios. Just like the clients themselves are built on top of these services, sorry, I think my PowerPoint is frozen right now. Just like the clients themselves are built on top of these services, our admin experiences are set up to make sure that the tools that you need to use for managing the product are in the right place for where you want to go to actually manage the element of the experience that you're touching. So as an example, we have a lot of controls for managing groups, identity, and licenses. These are all controls that will impact teams, but we're not going to build them separately just for teams. You will go to the M365 and the AAD admin tool set for managing those aspects of the product. The Teams and Skype for Business admin tool set is really around the controls you need for managing communications and team-specific features like messaging or calling or the channels within Teams themselves. And then all of the security and compliance tool sets are integrated into all the security and compliance tools for managing teams are integrated into the security and compliance tools that you have for the other workloads like Exchange or SharePoint. So you can see that a single admin who is tasked with managing something like security and compliance or managing identity will go to a single place for managing these aspects, including these aspects as they are relevant to teams. So just looking a little bit more deeply at what this might look like, when you talk about M365 core collaboration, you'll look at the group policies for naming, expiry, guest access, conditional access. When you talk about communications, these are the policies and configurations specific to teams like meetings or messaging or calling. And then when we talk about security and compliance, these are things like retention and e-discovery. Here's a view of setting up a retention policy that would control channel and chat messages. Touching really briefly on the configuration and policy model for Microsoft Teams, if you're familiar with Skype for Business, this is very similar to the model that we had for Skype for Business. We have two types of configurations and policies. Policies are governance elements that can be applied either across your whole organization or assigned to individual users so that most of your organization can have one experience or one set of features available to them. And then specific users who either need to have features taken away or need to be given extra features can be given those custom policies. Configurations, on the other hand, are going to apply for your whole organization. So when you go to leverage the configuration or a policy, you would go and you can create custom policies. So in this example, custom policy A and custom policy B. And you can assign those policies to specific users. But then you also have a default policy, and any user who doesn't have a custom policy explicitly assigned to them will have whatever values you set up within this default policy. Many of these policies are exposed for management within both the Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business Administration Center, and also via PowerShell. So if you think about the types of verbs that we expose for policy management scenarios, they are usually get, set, new for managing the policies themselves, and then remove and grant for assigning those policies to users. On the other hand, configurations are going to apply globally across your whole organization, and there's going to be one per type. The verbs there are usually get or set, and a good example here is right now we have single configurations that you can set up for specific elements of a guest user experience within Teams. So an example here is you could use the Teams guest messaging configuration for designating which messaging capabilities you want guests within your tenant to have.
I have a question. We want to take a quick break on that. Jesse asks, can you automate metadata and he says term store? What means something else? Metadata and term store integration to a new team creation for its SPO site, SharePoint Online site. I know Teams is getting full SPO column and SPO general library experience. Would these be better questions for someone from SharePoint?
I think that these would ultimately be better questions for someone from SharePoint.
Okay.
I'll show you some of the automation that we have for creating teams and some of the customizations that you can do. That's more, term store is a deeper SharePoint configuration piece.
Yeah.
And we do have integration where you can say, you know, the backing group. There's integration with certain configuration elements from AAD and how you can have teams set up to automatically pull in the right user.
Yeah.
But we'll demo that a little bit. That's a better one.
Thank you. Also, someone asked if the Skype telephony is going to Teams also. So I made the distinction between the Skype for Business infrastructure on the back end, which is really Skype for Business vNext.
Yes.
As opposed to sharing common infrastructure with the current Skype for Business online. That we have interop, and you'll talk briefly about that.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
What was the question? The question was just that clear. Okay.
Yeah.
Quick double click on what controls there are. And this is a point in time view. We are constantly bringing in new policies and configurations so that you can manage different parts of the experience. I think that this is a useful view to start looking at the richness of configuration elements that you have at your disposal. So if you think about what you have available for managing meetings, you have the meeting policy, meeting configuration, a set of policies and configurations for live events, and then also a guest meeting configuration. These elements are all found in the Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center, and you can also set them through automation using the Skype for Business PowerShell module. Then you can see on the right, we're calling out which of the team-specific roles will have access to setting these configurations. So under each, we have a lot of policies and configurations. We bucket them largely by what element of the Teams administration experience you're trying to control, and then make sure that the set of controls that you need are found in the place where the admin who is going to go manage those pieces will need to. So you can see that all of the meetings, messaging, and calling elements are going to be found in the Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center. The elements of collaboration are found within AAD because collaboration, the O365 group, which is a backing construct for a team, is a shared infrastructure piece. And so you'll find that all of these governance controls are going to be centralized within AAD. And then security and compliance controls, you can find some of them within the Security and Compliance Center, and then there are some scenarios that are more closely aligned with AAD because they handle this authentication or identity element. An important note that I do want to call out, some of these controls are advanced governance controls that require specific licenses, so I don't want that to come as a surprise to anyone. I've linked out the documentation on what comes with different service plans for future reference. So let's quickly look at what some of this talk will actually look like in motion. So I'm going to switch over to my machine. And what we're going to do to start is log into the Microsoft 365 admin portal. And the first piece we talked about was how do you make sure that you assign the appropriate role to the users within your IT department who are going to be managing teams. So within the admin portal, you can go over to users and you can take a specific user who's going to be on point for managing the product. And then here, just assign them the appropriate admin role. So this user is a global administrator already. You could switch over and assign them one of these 4 admin roles that we've built out for managing parts of the workload. So say this user was given the global administrator role because they needed to be able to manage parts of the team's experience, but actually found that all of the tasks they need to handle are scoped just to teams, right? Maybe they need to create O365 groups and do some messaging policy assignment. Instead of giving them global administrator, which is a really, really powerful role, switch their role here to the team service administrator, save that, and then they will now have the team service administrator role. They can perform the tasks that they need to without having overly too many permissions. these roles are integrated into the privileged identity management system within AAD. So if you want to make sure that users don't have standing elevation, you can make these roles PIM enabled and then have users go through elevation to have them assigned. So the other piece we talked about, now that your admin team has been given the roles that they need, was setting up the governance controls for the different types of management scenarios you may need for your organization. So one of the common scenarios that we hear is, how can you make sure that guests aren't allowed to access the content that you have within your organization? As we said, guest access within O365 groups is one of these shared elements. So you'll find the control there within the main admin portal and some of those controls within AAD. You go over to manage the settings for O365 groups. Here you can turn off the ability to access group content within O365 groups. So you've got the centralized high-level control for guest access. It's natively right within this main admin portal.
If you turn it off here, it's turned off under every scenario.
Yeah, for accessing the group itself, right? For accessing all that group content. One of the what we hear a lot from organizations is that some of them say, you know what, I actually don't want to turn off all group access. I just want to disable it for specific groups.
Mm-hmm.
And there are deeper controls you can have within AAD. So if we go over to PowerShell, I'm not going to connect to Skype for Business yet. So we can look at the O365 group setting that we've enabled already for O3. The O365 group settings that we've already enabled in the AAD PowerShell module. So here, I've already connected to PowerShell. I've connected to AAD, and I've connected to the Microsoft Teams PowerShell module. And I'm just going to pull the settings that we set up already for governing O365 groups, and we'll take a quick look at what we've set up for this tenant. So in this tenant, I did this briefly just beforehand. These are all the controls that we've set up for managing O365 groups. And as we said, there are a lot of different governance controls that you can set up. We'll talk quickly about what all these are. So in this tenant, I've said, there's certain words that I want to block when users are creating O365 groups. But I do want to allow users to add guests to groups. So this is the high-level control that we just looked at before. And then I've set up a set of classifications that will apply when users create these groups within the organization. So there's a default classification, and then there are any number of classifications that users can set. And then finally, I've set up this prefix naming requirement, which will mean that every group that gets created by end users will get prefixed to say a user created this. And so this is a set of ways that you can think about how, as a centralized IT department, you can set some safeguards on what your users are creating when they are managing O365 groups themselves. If you want to go more deeply, you can look at specific settings for managing guest access on a specific unified group. You can get here. So this is something that you could enable for a specific unified group. So even if you said guest access has been enabled for my whole tenant, I want to allow guests to be added to groups, you could say for the specific group, I actually want to say no, it's not allowed to have guests.
Right.
So if you're an organization that says, you know what, I do need to be able to collaborate with people outside of my tenancy, but I want to lock down access to specific content, here you can go through and manage all of those elements. So there's a set of high-level controls that you have and then deeper customization. And we find that there's a mix for organizations. Some of them prefer to go with high-level controls that allow users to kind of run free, and some of them prefer to go into deeper customization.
So let me just comment on a couple things. One is, Isabella, many of the organizations I've spoken to, government agencies, versus commercial, interestingly, really lean towards restricting who can create groups. And I think when you start a pilot it's useful to actually have fewer controls. I think guest access being turned off is a smart initial idea. And then having few controls when you initially have a pilot that includes perhaps IT and one or two business groups, just to see how big of an issue sprawl might be. Because the biggest concern I hear is we have to lock everything down because of sprawl. My sense is this is almost a legacy of SharePoint on premises, where people were very concerned about orphaned SharePoints and multiple SharePoints being created, for the same project and confusion. So if you could speak to what you think a good set of settings would be, where you would
the right set of controls.
the right set of controls for pilot, and then just talk about sort of longer term. Like I like the idea of adding the creator's name as a prefix or maybe a suffix to the name of a team. I think that's smart. I also think that expiration policy is very important. Yep. And then in terms of guest access, there's a regular set of a recurrence of reviews of guests. If you could speak to those things, that would be helpful.
So it varies a lot organization by organization. I think largely what we find is expiry policy provides value for dealing with sprawl. The other thing that I'll call out is there are two ways of saying specific users should or should not be able to create groups. One of them is even if you turn off group creation, privileged administrators, including the team service admin, will always be able to create groups. Mm-hmm. So you can turn off end user group creation and still have that governance centralized to your IT department. Right. And then there's an advanced feature where you could actually specify a security group of users who are not admins who should also be able to create groups themselves.
So maybe at the manager level.
At the manager level, right?
Champions or some
exactly
of business users.
I think that what we find is that if, as an organization, you know what types of groups you want to create for your users to collaborate with, and you set that up for them in advance, there's a much lower likelihood that users are going to go create groups themselves.
Right. Because willy-nilly.
Right, because you've actually set them up with the right things.
Default set.
Right, and usually users go and create groups because they think that there's something missing. If you make sure that their onboarding experience means that when they come into the client, they're not going to go create something because they just think it's not
the logical organizational groups have been created. And then talk about my understanding is at Microsoft, all full-time employees can create teams or create groups. Contractors cannot. I've also heard that our expiration policy, which is set for 6 months, is very effective, like some 40% or more.
I think it's more aggressive than 6 months.
Yeah.
Last I checked, but it is very effective.
Yeah, yes, it's very effective in reducing sprawl. And then if you could speak to the namespace issue, many people are concerned about teams showing up in their Azure Active Directory or in their Outlook GAL or their GAL in Exchange. If you could just talk about the namespace and the other aspects of sprawl.
By default, teams that are created will not show up in Outlook. So you're going to have that segmentation of client experience where you don't have it kind of clouding up your right. They do show up in AAD, they're groups. But you can, as I said, and we looked at briefly, you can set the prefix naming policy. So one of the scenarios we hear is organizations want to be able to really easily identify the difference between something that an end user has created versus something that's created centralized by IT. And so here, if you set up the right prefix naming policy, which is this right here, you can make sure that those are designated separately.
Right, that's smart. And Tom asked, does the enforced appended name require a specific level of license? And my understanding is no. Is there a special?
There's a special license for naming policy.
Oh, there is a special license for naming policy.
I believe I can't remember if it's P1 or P2. I link off in the deck to where all of the requirements are.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So these are the governance controls within AAD for groups. And then let's look at some of the governance controls you have within Security and Compliance Center really briefly, and then over to the Teams admin portal. So if we go over,
it requires premium and I will share that link with the group.
So we'll look really briefly at some of the governance controls you have within Security and Compliance Center. There, are a lot of different scenarios in which you might want to set up some governance. One of them is making sure that malicious attachments or malicious files your users are protected against across all of the different surfaces. So if I were to go over to threat management, and my mouse would work, here we go. Here under safe attachments, you can turn on advanced threat protection for SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams, all in a single place. And so that's a good way of making sure that the same governance controls or the same security controls that you have for other parts of your Office 365 are being leveraged in Teams as well. So just like you're protected against malicious attacks over email, you can be protected against malicious attacks within Teams. Another common scenario we hear from customers is around setting up the appropriate retention policy for their content within Teams. So here you can see that we've actually set up already a retention policy that will be specific to channel messages. So this is a retention policy that will ensure that all content within channel messages will get retained for 7 years. So in the same place that you would go for setting up your retention policy for content within SharePoint or OneDrive or email, you can come here and set up a retention policy that will apply to the content that's generated within Teams.
Isabel, could you briefly talk about how Teams leverages the Exchange Online infrastructure for message retention and
content gets stored within Substrate, and then we pull into the exact same infrastructure that's used for Exchange Online for storing content within the appropriate mailbox to make sure that we apply we're using the same service for applying retention.
So users can't view their Teams
but it's
content
hidden within
via their Exchange or Outlook clients. But from an administrative perspective, all the tools, the archiving, even third-party tools in many cases that are used for Exchange compliance and security and archiving can be used for Teams security, compliance, and archiving.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really great values of Teams is you don't have to go to a separate place to set up all of these elements. You don't have to worry about different infrastructure. It's the same infrastructure that's been supporting Exchange Online for years. Let's quickly switch over to the Teams admin portal. Talk about some of the governance controls that you have available there. So within the Teams admin portal, you're going to be doing all of the governance and management tasks that are specific to the Teams product itself. So here you can go and view all of the users that have been enabled for Teams. You can get some information about what policies those users have, their call quality over time. So one of the common scenarios that we hear from an organization when they're looking to onboard is they'll say, well, I want to onboard, but there's something about meetings, for example, that I actually want to disable for my users because it's not going to meet the business requirements that I have. And so
maybe you have to upgrade the meeting room systems or something along those lines.
One of the scenarios that we hear a lot, and we'll go over, so if you go over to meeting policy and you click into the default policy, this is the one that's going to apply for all of your organization unless they have explicit policy assigned. One of the scenarios is, maybe around external participants. So you actually don't want external participants to be able to get control of the presentation. Right? That's a scenario that we hear sometimes from organizations.
Sure.
So if you want to be able to disable that for the majority of people within your organization, you can just come to the global policy and turn that off, and then save that. And any user who does not have a default policy or a custom policy assigned will get that org-wide default. If, on the other hand, you have another user who needs a custom policy created, you can go and create that custom policy. An example right here, right? You can go and create that custom policy and then toggle the bits that you need for your organization.
Which you might do for executive admins, for example.
Executive
different
admins.
kinds of meetings.
Yep.
And this is, you say user, but it's on a security group basis. So it could be individual users or security groups?
We currently only support individual users.
Okay.
Bringing in security group support is something that the team is working on.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So if you know, that example where you created a custom policy that could be assigned to specific users, you can then come to this user page and go in and select the users that you want to assign that policy to. So here I'm going to just select multiple users and just perform a bulk edit of what policies they've been assigned.
I see. Okay.
And so that's where, although we don't support security groups right now, you could go through, you could do a bulk edit process. And there's a lot of automation that you can do within PowerShell as well for performing this operation.
Mm-hmm.
So now these users are going to have, you can see I just changed it to the meeting policy as everything's on. And you can see that those users now reflect that new policy.
Great.
So if we switch back over, you know, and just think about some of the stuff that we've just done. Let me switch back to my presentation. We looked at how we can assign a specific admin role to one of the users who's going to be supporting teams. We looked at a lot of the governance controls we have for 365 groups. We had a classification list created. We have an explicit prefix policy so that we make sure that all user-created groups are prefixed appropriately. We updated some policies to make sure that the meetings experience for users is going to meet our requirements. And then we looked at the retention policy for Teams channels. The specific needs that you have for your organization are going to vary. And so we have a governance guide that you can walk through at this link that we'll share out afterwards, that helps you think about the different controls that you have at your disposal and what's going to make sense for your organization. So I encourage you all to walk through that and kind of think about what your business requirements are, and then set up the governance controls appropriately. So now that we've set up all of this pre-work, it's time to actually think about onboarding to teams. And there are a couple of considerations that you're going to have as you think about onboarding. So one of them is just where are you moving from? And the other is what are the business needs that you have? So what are the features or functionality, or what are the business requirements you have for what you want to get out of leveraging Microsoft Teams? The primary focus for what I'll demo is really about how you can actually set up the teams within your organization on behalf of your users. But a lot of the other considerations that organizations will have are things like upgrading from Skype for Business Online or on-premises to Teams, or things like setting up cloud voice in Teams. And then there's always this element of, as you onboard, thinking about how to make sure that your users, from a people perspective, are actually ready to leverage this new product. Teams is different. It's been amazing and fundamentally changed how we work. But it's good to have a change management strategy for how you're going to introduce this to your users. And so those pilots that Bill was talking about are a great way of thinking about how your organization is going to be able to leverage Teams appropriately.
And just to add a little color commentary on that, because I think it's so important to think about why Teams. Organizations have Skype for Business, they have Outlook, they have SharePoint. Why Teams? And at least in my case, I can say I save at least an hour a day because I use Teams. And there's a lot of communication tools at Microsoft that we've had, even the ones not available in GCC, like Yammer. And Teams has taken over the engineering teams at Microsoft in a way that really no other tool since Outlook has.
Yeah.
And I have many colleagues who say that they've reduced their email usage by more than half. So in my case, I used to spend 4 hours a day on Outlook. I now spend 2 hours on Outlook, 1 hour on Teams, and I get more work done in those 3 hours than in the 4 hours I used to spend. And I feel like I'm more on top of my work. I can find information when I want it. It's really information at your fingertips.
It really is.
So, I mean, that's why I encourage, organizations to pilot Teams, and I think they'll find significant benefits to managing any sort of project work in Teams, taking that collaboration about known projects with known project teams out of their inbox and moving it into Teams, and they can stay on top of multiple projects more effectively than trying to manage it all within a great product like Outlook, but just not designed for sort of project or per topic collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I think I used to get 2,000 emails a day.
2,000. Oh my God.
I was in anti-spam, so we did a lot of automation.
And I just feel so much freer now.
Yeah,
to get
it
my
really
work
does.
done
It really does.
Yeah.
Onboarding. There are two different approaches to onboarding. Organic, which is really driven by your users and what they've identified as their needs, and then IT-driven onboarding, which is driven by these pre-identified business requirements that you might have. I genuinely believe that there's space for both approaches in many organizations. I think if you're an organization that really wants to trial this out first, it's good to do that pilot where you kind of set up everything on behalf of your users. And then once you see how your users are leveraging it and consider some of the concerns that you might have around team sprawl or making sure that users are creating the right groups, once you've seen how that pilot works, you can then look at opening it up more towards our organic onboarding. So when we talk about IT-driven onboarding, as I said, this can be done with or without self-service group creation enabled. And it can be driven through a number of different means. We have a set of graph APIs. Many are now in 1.0 and others are in beta. If you're, just a quick note, in GCC High and DoD, there are different endpoints for graph. And these graph APIs can be used for building your own automation tools around group creation and management. In addition, we have a set of PowerShell commandlets in the Microsoft Teams beta PowerShell module for automating a lot of this team creation as well. So this is just, creating the teams themselves, updating settings and channels, and adding and removing members. We're going to look really quickly at what that type of IT-driven onboarding might look like. So I have over here an example of, I have a set of predefined groups that I want to create. So I've created an Excel file that has a set of names that I want to create for groups, and I'm going to automatically create a set of teams that are all set to access type private, and there are a number of other controls that you could set when you actually provision those teams. And then I'm going to automatically add some channels that I've identified I want to have for every team. So an example here might be you might have a set of projects that are all going to be run in the same way, where there's going to be one work stream for marketing and one work stream for engineering, and then one work stream for the needs you have for the conversation you have with legal. And so you're going to create a separate channel for each of those different work streams, and then one channel for tracking all of the general progress. And so if you've identified that you have a set of projects that are all going to be run in that way, you're going to automate the creation, the deeper customization of the team themselves. For graph, you can even add the apps that you might need to have in those teams for working appropriately. And then I have a set of operations that I'm going to do to actually add the appropriate users. So an example here might be I have a bunch of teams in my organization that are set up for the legal department. And I want to make sure that a set of newly onboarded users who are in the legal department get added to the appropriate teams. So I'm going to find all of the users who are in the legal department and then add them to the teams that have legal in the name. So we're going to automate that. You can see that these are kind of basic management tasks that I'm performing, but there's a really rich opportunity for extending this to meet the specific scenarios of automation of onboarding that you have within your organization. So I'm just going to run this script quickly. And when we were over here and we were looking at a lot of the governance controls that you have within teams, one of the new areas that we've built out is the ability for IT admins to look at all of the teams in their organization. So this was a big ask from customers to be able to see, hey, what types of teams are being created either by my IT department or by my end users, so that I know, what's the total count of teams? Is there team sprawl? Are all of the settings that users are enabling on the teams the appropriate ones? Are the classifications right? What users are able to access this access this different content. So this is where your team service admin or your global admin could go and look at what users are creating within the tenancy. And you can see that I have this script running to create a bunch of teams. We had 15 teams before. And already those teams have started to show up in my view of the teams that have been created within my organization. So you can click through on one of these teams and see, okay, here are some of the channels that have been created for users to leverage. And then as we let this run further, you can see that this is one of the legal teams that I've created, right? Those appropriate legal users have already been added. And here you can go and say, okay, well, this one new user needs to be promoted as an owner. So I'll go here and I'll just go and quickly promote that user as an owner. I've logged in earlier within my Teams client to one of these users who was in the legal department. And you can see that this user has actually already seen that team show up within the client.
And the admin is not a member of
the admin doesn't need to be. In this particular, just for the simplicity of automation, because I didn't want to choose a randomly selected owner, right. The admin is an owner, but you can specify the parameter is just /owner. You can specify whichever owner you want to have own that team, so they can perform all of these management tasks on behalf of their tenant.
That's right, and that avoids bumping up against the limit on the number of teams the admin could create as a user.
Well, and actually the team service admin will always be able to exceed that 250 group limit.
Right.
So they'll be able to provision well beyond that.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah. And you can see that those management tasks that I was performing right here, if I go over to this manage teams view, I can manage teams that I don't actually belong to. So this is a team where, the only owner, I'm logged in as David, the only owner is named John. So I can manage this team even though I don't belong.
And that's important. So if John leaves the company, you can go in and assign another member as an owner of a team, and you don't have the team orphaned because no one can manage it.
Yeah. One of the really common scenarios we hear about admins being able to rescue ownerless teams. And another one is just, an admin may say, hey, I want to go and change a particular setting on all of the teams in my organization. Say, I want to disable the ability to allow editing of set messages. It's because I've changed something about the regulations I have within my organization. The admin can script that without having to add himself as a member of every single one of those teams.
Beyond that, our best practice is always to have at least 2 owners.
At least 2 owners. Absolutely true. Yep. So you can see that actually this onboarding experience, that could very well be my pilot, right? I could identify just in a quick Excel file, these are the things that I want to pre-create. I'm going to go through and add all of the appropriate members, and then your organization is actually going to be ready to go. There are a lot of deeper configuration. You can use these as the building blocks that you may need for deeper ongoing management scenarios or deeper onboarding scenarios, and we'll be constantly enriching the set of APIs and commandlets that you have for provisioning the teams and updating a lot of the settings.
Is there any sample scripts in the documents that are up on docs.microsoft.com?
I believe there are. There are absolutely examples within the PowerShell commandlet documentation.
Oh, okay, great. They're team specific?
They're team specific.
Excellent.
That's largely for, each commandlet will get documented separately to say these are the parameters, accepts, and here's an example of how to run it. And there are, I believe, also examples there's a link out at the end of this session to a how-to kind of governance overview that I believe also has an example. And if people are looking for deeper examples, feel free to put them in touch.
I actually just found the link. I'll share that.
Okay.
I'll share it with everyone.
Great. So when we talk about once you've actually onboarded, right? You've started this pilot. It's getting good adoption. Your users are, they're actually using the product on a day-to-day basis. When we talk about some of the ongoing management tasks that you might perform when you're onboarding, these are things like using the call analytics toolset to troubleshoot and user call problems. Things like creating policies for new organizational needs. So maybe before you said that the external participants couldn't request access during a meeting, and now you say actually it's okay because we've determined in our organization that that's actually something that will allow. And then managing the teams in the organization to ensure that the users are productive. So things like this example we had before of rescuing ownerless teams or adding new users on behalf of the team owners. All of the controls that we talked about still apply, but there are a set of other controls that you might find that you need to leverage on a day-to-day basis. Things like call analytics, this manage teams page, things like the content search within Security and Compliance Center. And again, these controls are aligned with the different tool set that you would go to, that that particular admin would go to. So quickly shifting over back to the admin portal, and just looking really quickly at what call analytics might look like. Here, when you click on a user, and this particular quality view is going to be shown to all 4 of those Teams admin roles that we talked about. You can look at their call history and troubleshoot some problems that they might have. So if you click through on a particular call, you can see that the issue here was called by an issue with the network. And so here you're going to have this quick view of, okay, if my user calls in and they have a difficulty with a call that they've placed, you're going to get rich insights directly within the admin portal to go and understand a little bit better why that may have happened and what actions you can then take to remediate. So here it's an issue with the network. Another common management task we hear is updating policies. And so we looked before at what automation might look like within the AAD toolset and within the onboarding toolset. Let's look at what it might look like when you are trying to perform some automations around policy management. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect to the Skype for Business PowerShell module, which is where all of the policy, which is where all of the policy controls live for Microsoft Teams. So I've connected to PowerShell for Skype for Business, then Skype for Business PowerShell module, and this is where the policy and configuration controls for Microsoft Teams live. And one of the common management scenarios we hear is doing something like saying, okay, I want to make sure that everyone within this particular department gets the appropriate policy that they need. So I can quickly identify all of the users who are in my legal department and assign them the appropriate policy that I've set up for the appropriate messaging policy, for example, that I've set up for users within that department. So I just quickly ran a script to show you. I'm going to grab all of the users who are in the legal department, and then I'm going to take all of those users and assign them the legal messaging policy that I've set up in advance. So this is closer to the example that Bill was asking about earlier, which is making sure that all users in a particular group or scenario how they can get this or certain policy.
Right.
Right now, this is something that you can automate through scripting. So another thing that you could do is take all users in an existing security group, iterate through those users, and assign them the appropriate policy. So we'll look at these users.
And just while we're doing that, I want to remind you, we've only got about 5 more minutes.
Okay, I will kick this one quickly. So you can see this is a set of users that I have in my organization. They are in the legal department. They have no explicit messaging policy assigned, which means they're going to fall back to the default. So I will quickly just go through and say, okay, assign them the legal messaging policy. And then all of these users will get the appropriate policy.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two of the management tasks you'll find within your organization that there are going to be different ones that you'll need to perform yourselves. So, you may need to perform more modification of the policies, or you leverage call analytics heavily. And then quickly, once you've actually onboarded to the product, once you're performing all these governance tasks, a common ask is how can you actually celebrate the success and think about how users are leveraging the product. And there we have user reporting that's integrated into the M365 admin portal, and a set of detailed reports within the Teams admin center as well on individual users, Teams usage, the collab elements themselves, and device management as well. And then just a quick note that does not support GCC High and DoD yet, as of yet.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a set of resources for how you can plan your own governance experience. There's a set of overview docs just around Microsoft Teams and planning for the different government clouds, a set of rich admin trainings, and then some quick reference for technical documentation around Teams and the Teams Graph APIs and the Teams and Skype for Business PowerShell modules. So with that, thank you so much. I think we've got probably like 3 minutes for questions.
Yeah, let's see if we have any questions. I'll switch back over. I've been asking them as we go along. Any additional questions before we wrap up? Let Isabella get back to improving the product. Okay, going once. Going twice. All right, I think you've answered everyone's question. Oh, whoop, one quick question coming in. Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. And I will be sending out a recording of this along with the links that we provided. And Joe, good question about additional tabs that are coming. And this is a very popular request. So thank you so much for your patience. The planner integration should be coming this quarter by the end of March. So we are working hard on that. And our goal is to have almost all the features that are available in commercial available in GCC as soon as possible. But it does take a while to go through the audit process. So we're still working on that. But thank you for your patience, and be assured that we are working on it, and it's coming to you as soon as it possibly can. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. I'll be sending out a recording along with the links. And please share with your colleagues. There's recordings of previous onboarding sessions, and I have a couple more of the GCC onboarding sessions coming up in the next week or so. So feel free to encourage your colleagues to join that and get those Teams pilots started. I think if people will focus on using Teams as their primary communication tool for one project for 1 week, by the end of that week, the majority of the participants will say, this is saving us time, we want to adopt this, and you'll see, really, I think, rapid usage of Teams throughout your organizations. Thank you all very much.